listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
A funny thing happened to me on the way to this studio, into which I just walked seconds ago. I have fought my way through fallen trees, through blizzards, driven snow, cancelled trains, roadblocks, car crashes, no taxis, sub-zero temperatures, just to be here because the show must go on. A show which last week had an audience of more than 1 million people. And you are most welcome if you are here for the first time. We'll be dealing with issues large and small, from is it Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays? Where did that madness come from? To should women MPs be allowed to bring their babies into the House of Commons chamber? Why not, I say? After all, MPs bring their drug habits, their alcohol habits, their greed, their avarice, the monkeys on their back, the prejudices in their pockets. What's wrong with a lovely baby in the House of Commons? That's what I say. And we'll be talking about the big issue of the week here in Britain, the death in a watery grave of 27 migrants being people trafficked across the English Channel. On the day that it's announced, a people trafficker in Britain has just been deported for the third time in 2 years. Do you feel me? We'll be talking about the motion of no confidence in Boris Johnson coming up in the coming week. What could possibly go wrong? It's the mother of all talk shows, so fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
We, as I said, will be touring the horizon this evening on the mother of all talk shows. If you are listening to us in crystal clear FM in Washington, D.C., as President Donald Trump used to do, it's 105.5 FM. You can listen in not so crystal clarity on AM right across the United States, from coast to coast, from burning city to burning city. You can listen across the whole world, of course, on SputnikNews.com. But if you are watching, and 500,000 of you did last week, on any of the platforms that we're on, please tell other people. If you're watching on Facebook, either my own Facebook or RT's multiple Facebook pages, please share with all your contacts, all your friends, because algorithm is always lurking, seeking to divert attention away from what is the biggest show of its kind on the entire planet. It is the Open University of the Airwaves. There are no tuition fees, and you are positively encouraged to speak back to the somewhat undereducated teacher that is me. You can watch on YouTube. If you're there on my YouTube, please subscribe. You can watch on Twitter, on Twitch, on Telegram, on every platform that you could shake a stick at. But the important thing is that we continue to grow and grow this tremendous Open University of the Airwaves. As I say, we'll be dealing with issues large and small. You might think the issue of whether it's Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays is small, but the British Civil Service doesn't agree with you, because they've just issued a pronunciamento telling civil servants to avoid the term Merry Christmas because it might offend Muslims. This is a perennial lie. I have never met a Muslim who was remotely offended by anybody using the term Christmas. After all, this is a predominantly, if nominally, Christian country. Why would you change the name of arguably your premier holiday, the Christmas holiday, to avoid offending people who are not remotely offended? It is white people being offended on behalf of black people that is so prevalent in the cancel culture, in the woke wonderland in which we currently live. Speaking of which, I am Morning Star Bear. She wept, and the crowd cheered. In fact, they rose as a standing ovation. In Saskatchewan University, in a TED Talk, to a complete fraudster who had risen to the heights of being Canada's #1 standard bearer for the rights of Indigenous people, First Nation people, they call them there, the original Americans. She, actually from Russia, her family, her antecedents were farmers in Russia, another Russian act of disinformation, transformed herself right down to the eagle feathers, the headdress, the full Native American garb, and up she rose through the ranks of academia, through the political ranks, and the liberals, dewy-eyed, cheered and cheered and cheered, and it was all a fraud. How many times has that happened? How many white people are appointing themselves as the spokespeople for minorities that never asked them to be their spokesperson in the first place, and don't actually hold many of the views ascribed to them by their white champions? The Canadian example, only the latest. There was a spectacular one in the United States where a woman identified as black and went on to become a more than radical black leader, except she wasn't black and she wasn't leading any black people. She was leading white liberals with guilt loaded on both of their shoulders into controversies that were never chosen by the minorities being championed. And there are plenty of people like that here in Britain. The witch hunters of J.K. Rowling, for example, are overwhelmingly men. They're not women. They're not even trans women. They are male liberals who are witch hunting the most successful author in British history, bar none, who sold more copies than Shakespeare and Dickens put together. They are witch hunting her to the point that the Harry Potter cast are about to have a party to commemorate the anniversary of Harry Potter, but without J.K. Rowling, who gave them all a job. If I sound angry about all of this, it's because I am. We're asking on the poll, will you be wishing Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays? Cheer me up after my nightmare day and get voting on my Twitter feed, on my Telegram, and on my YouTube channel about that. Speaking of the channel, the manslaughter, if not murder, of 27 souls, mainly men, but including women, including teenagers, and including at least one small child, was the story that dominated at least a day in the British mass media, maybe two. Maybe they squeezed it out for a second day. But just like with the attack on the Liverpool Women's Hospital, they quickly put it down because it didn't suit the agenda of the people who dominate our political class and our mass media. I refer to the aforementioned liberals. Why do I say so? Well, it's absolutely abundantly clear that these souls were lost because the French authorities turned a blind eye to their attempt to illegally leave France and illegally enter the United Kingdom in bad weather conditions in a 30-foot rubber dinghy. As any fool knoweth, the English Channel is a very treacherous piece of water. To allow innocents, including children, including at least one pregnant woman, to set off on such a journey, which has been procured through gangsterism, through organized crime, through the paying of, it's said, £2 million a day to illegal people trafficking, is a crime against humanity committed by President Macron and his government in France. Some fools who don't have the nerve to openly advocate in the political arena for no borders at all, for 6 billion people to be allowed untrammeled to move into the space lived in by 1 billion people, they tried to turn the blame onto the government of the United Kingdom. Now, the government of the United Kingdom is guilty of many, many things. If it was up to me, most of them, if not all of them, would be behind bars in a prison cell this evening for the many crimes that they have already committed. But this was not one of them, for a multiple of reasons. One of the crimes the British government has committed is not to take their fair share of refugees. Every country in the world has a moral and legal duty to accept their fair share of refugees. And we have taken nothing like our fair share of refugees, not even factoring in that our country and the United States of America have created more refugees than all the other countries in the world, and therefore should be paying a premium of taking more than their per capita and their income per capita share of those refugees. By which I mean people with a well-founded and legitimate claim to danger and political persecution in the country from which they have fled. But many of the migrants on board these rubber dinghies, well, all of them are actually setting sail from safe countries, Belgium and France, but most of them are coming from countries where there is no war, where there has been no war, and ipso facto cannot qualify under the Act as people with a legitimate, well-founded fear of persecution. Let me take the example of some of the tragically lost in the English Channel last week. It seems that at least a quarter of them, maybe more, were from Iraqi Kurdistan. There has been no war or even sanctions in Iraqi Kurdistan for more than 30 years. More than 30 years ago, the British and American state effectively made Iraqi Kurdistan a client state, a base from which to launch military operations and economic and social destabilizations against the Republic of Iraq. There is no persecution in Iraqi Kurdistan. Or if there is, what are the British and American outlets there who run the country with the duopoly of the political structures in Iraqi Kurdistan doing about it, saying about it. There is no fighting there. There has been no fighting there for 30 years. There is no oppression there. In fact, it's touted by the British government itself as one of the only democracies in the entire Middle East. Now, unless you are someone who has fallen so foul of that political duopoly in Iraqi Kurdistan that you are personally being persecuted, then you are not, in fact, a refugee under the meaning of the Act. Ditto Kosovo. There has been no war in Kosovo for 20 years. In fact, Kosovo is another NATO international protectorate. So ipso facto, there cannot be political oppression in Kosovo. Can there? Because we're running Kosovo, which we illegally wrested out of Serbia as we arrested so much of the former Yugoslavia into our orbit for geopolitical reasons. It follows you cannot be a refugee from Kosovo unless you are, for example, a part of the Serbian minority being oppressed by the Kosovan majority, which Britain and the United States funds, arms, and gives political and diplomatic cover to. Do you see where I'm going with this? We're not taking enough refugees. We're not taking remotely enough refugees. Nothing like our share. But somebody landing on your beach in a rubber dinghy and melting off into the night is not a refugee. When they're fleeing from France and Belgium, landing on your beach and disappearing, by definition, they are not refugees. They are illegal migrants. And unless you're one of the Trotskyites or liberals or free market capitalists that doesn't believe in borders, you have to accept the right, the responsibility, the duty of the British state to protect its borders. And here's the greatest irony of all. What is supposed to be a conservative government that wraps itself in the flag when it counts, that sends soldiers all the way to the Polish-Belarusian border to protect the Polish border, is doing absolutely nothing to protect our own border, unless you count escorting those that didn't melt away from the beachhead to a hotel for a long but indeterminate period, whilst a totally dysfunctional Home Office tries to process their applications for political asylum. Witness the man I referred to earlier that was today deported for the third time in 2 years from Britain. Well, he's only a people trafficker. Why should I be so hard on him? Or I could close with a much more serious example. The man who blew himself up in Liverpool, but who intended either to blow up the people at the Remembrance Sunday ceremony in Liverpool Cathedral, according to some reports, or the new mothers, pregnant women, and newborn babies in the Liverpool Women's Hospital, was denied asylum 7 years ago, but was still here in Britain, even though in the interim he'd been sectioned under the Mental Health Act for running around the centre of Liverpool holding a large machete. How's that for a Home Office? How's that for a Ministry of the Interior? I told you it's going to be a hot show tonight, so fasten your seatbelts. This is the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Radio Sputnik. The mother of all talk shows was created because early lunacy detection can save lives. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, some IQs declined by 90%. Now, doctors are diagnosing later stage lunacy, which could have been detected sooner. Don't wait. Share the mother of all talk shows with a loved one and speak to George Galloway about common sense today. It takes all of us to overcome idiots. Call the teacher today and get an education.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
The phone lines are open. We're taking your calls now. Get them in early. Avoid disappointment. The number is 08081 965522 if you're in the United Kingdom. If you're in the United States, it's +1 844 944 3344. Absolutely free either way. It's free in the United Kingdom. It's free in the United States and Canada. Maybe the Morning Star Bear, the chief of the original Americans, unmasked as a farmer's daughter from Russia and the Ukraine, might care to call in. You can email the show anytime at onair@moats.tv. You can tweet me at George Galloway at RTUK. Now the poll is up and running. Will you be wishing Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays? A, Merry Christmas. B, Happy Holidays. You can vote on my Twitter feed, on my YouTube, on my Telegram. Now, in the interim, Haiti has a new government. Will it be any better than the last one? Well, you've got to go to the Oracle for an answer to that, and his name is Kim Ives, journalist and filmmaker and friend of the show. Kim, welcome back on the mother of all talk shows. Are you filled with joy at the new government in Haiti, or should we reserve judgment?
Yeah, I think it's best, George, to reserve judgment. This government is really a new hybrid between what used to be what they called the radical opposition to Jovenel Moïse and the PHTK party of former President Michel Martelly. The head of the radical opposition is a guy called André Michel. He heads the coalition of sorts that is called the Democratic and Popular Sector. And so their members, as well as those of the primary Social Democratic Party in Haiti, called the Fusion, as well as these PHTK heavyweights, are what filled the 9 new posts, the new appointments out of 18 total ministries. So half of them were reshuffled to more or less assuage the very impatient opposition, which was beginning to almost get ready to break ties with Ariel Henry, the prime minister, because he had not reshuffled the cabinet. Usually with these cabinet reshufflings, there's a couple of posts which are really key. Things like Interior Ministry, Justice Ministry, Foreign Affairs, Public Works to some extent for all the jobs that can be given out. And in Haiti, practically the only industry that's functioning is the government. So it's a big deal who gets the jobs as ministers so they can give to their friends and families and partisans jobs on the government payroll. It's very interesting, though, to look at one particular post, the Justice Minister. This is a guy called Berthaud d'Orsay. He had a sort of, I could say, Lavalas lineage and pedigree back in the day. But in 1997, he was arrested and spent 6 months in a Haitian jail for involvement in drug trafficking. Today, he is the justice minister.
Wow. And
not just the justice minister, but he's also the lawyer for some very big mafioso of the PHTK party of Michel Martelly. And this is important to understand because he's the lawyer for Charles Kiko Saint-Remy, who is Michel Martelly's brother-in-law and the chief drug trafficker in Haiti. He is for Dimitri Vorbe, who is one of the big bourgeois individuals who was at great odds with Jovenel Moïse. And he is also the lawyer for a number of the other families. I could go into more depth if you'd like, the Miz family, the Colley family, and others. So his appointment is very important because one of the things that may have contributed to Jovenel Moïse's July 7th assassination was his arrest precisely of Sanson La Familia, who was sort of the poster boy for mafia corruption and criminality in Haiti. He was charged with everything under the sun, from kidnapping to theft. And he was re-arrested by the Haitian authorities with the cooperation of the Dominicans in May of last year, May 15th. And then 2 months later, Jovenel Moïse was assassinated. So it's looking more and more, George, like Kiko Saint-Remy and his minions may have had a hand in this assassination of Jovenel Moïse. And now we see a justice minister who's basically going to probably free them all.
Well, that anticipates my next question. The last time we spoke, the president had just been murdered. Let's call it what it is. He was murdered in front of his wife in his family home. Everyone said they were determined to get to the bottom of it, including the United States government, which offered all assistance. Haiti's not a massive place. The list of suspects is relatively short. How is the investigation going?
Well, it's completely on ice. It's completely forgotten. You wouldn't even know it had happened if you were to listen to the news around Haiti these days, because the whole focus is on other things. And those other things are primarily the uprising of the vast lumpen proletariat of Port-au-Prince. But the assassination of Jovenel Moïse and the calls for justice for Jovenel Moïse, because as many problems as people might have had with Jovenel Moïse and his bending over for the US in terms specifically of Venezuela, to some extent Western Sahara too. He opened up an embassy there. So he was being the errand boy of Trump in the final days. But nonetheless, he became something of a martyr. The fact that this foreign mercenary hit squad came in, machine gunned him in his bedroom, and now you don't hear anything about it. So, they've arrested a bunch of people who are obviously nothing, either dupes like this unfortunate pastor/doctor Sanon, who clearly didn't have the money, means, or anything to carry out a plot of this size. This cost millions and millions of dollars, 3 months of having 30 mercenaries basically on standby in safe houses throughout Port-au-Prince. So we don't know who's behind it, but the circumstantial evidence points increasingly to this bourgeois sector. We talked about it on the last show, Reginald Boulos and Dimitri Vorbe, with Kiko Saint-Remy, increasingly, I'm thinking may have been involved as well.
Now, lastly, Kim, and I'm grateful for your time, especially as you've plainly got a cough. Can you tell us what happened to the, you mentioned the lumpen proletarian, the slum dwellers in Port-au-Prince. What happened to the political mobilization that you described to us last time you were on the show?
Well, it's still ongoing, George, and even gaining momentum. I would say that there's been a total demonization campaign against this movement headed by the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a cutout, as you know, of the CIA, does basically the political work that the CIA used to do covertly before it was founded in 1983 under the Reagan administration. And one of their principal tools in doing their work are what they call the human rights organizations in Haiti. These have been the ones leading the charge against this front. And the biggest thing, George, I think your listeners and viewers should know is that there's just, in the mainstream media, which is another tool of this machine, they make a conflation of the criminal gangs, the genuinely criminal gangs like 400 Maozo, 400 Maozo, which has now 15 North American missionaries they're still holding. They released 2 of them last week. They had kidnapped these 17 missionaries and were demanding $17 million ransom. You don't hear anything about this in the news, the same way as you don't hear about the assassination. There's other gangs like the group in Village de Dieu of Izo, the gang leader of Tilaplis gang in Grand Ravine, T. Gabriel and Cité Soleil. These are genuinely criminal gangs involved avowedly in kidnapping and so forth. And against them, ranked against them is the G9, what's called the revolutionary forces of the G9 now, who are fighting that criminality, the kidnapping, the extortion of small merchants, the rape that goes on, etc. And yet the two are conflated, and because the principal target of the US government, which has Magnitsky sanctions against the leader of this lumpen proletariat movement, Jimmy Cherizier, is that, you know, this could end up leading to a social revolution. They are asking for an overthrow of the system, not just politically by putting in another progressive president, as Jean-Bertrand Aristide came into power in 1990 and 2000, but really to take over the means of production of the bourgeoisie, which owns it. As he always says, it's 85% of the nation's wealth is in the hand of 5% of the population. So this is a very alarming program, as we can imagine, to the US Embassy and its allies in Haiti.
Kim Ives, you really are the oracle. You're an encyclopedia of the events there. Please stay in touch and we'll review progress of this new hybrid government in due course. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. The poll is, oh my goodness, thousands are voting on this already. Will you be wishing A, Merry Christmas, 92%, B, Happy Holidays, 8%. A big defeat for the woke so far. Please note British civil service. Now we've got social media already. Paula Doherty says, it will always be Merry Christmas. Sick to death of the woke trying to cancel us. And Noordin Abbas says, I'm a Muslim and I'm certainly not offended in the least. Well said. And Attila says, Happy Saturnalia, everyone, as it was before Christmas. Saturnalia, that has a ring to it. Gregarious George says, Merry or Happy Christmas. I am not an American. And Nice Bloke Phil says, Merry Christmas all the way. We are British, not American. And Alexandra S. says, keep happy holidays in Yankland, thanks, and keep the USA and its culture out of the UK and Europe, thanks. My apologies to American viewers and listeners if this all sounds a little hostile, as you would put it. Very Frank says, why is it so bad to wish people Merry Christmas? I can never understand that. It's a holiday due to Christmas. Why can't people call it as such? For the record, he says, I am not a Christian. Let's take one call before the break. Victor is in Greenwich. Victor, welcome.
Thank you, George, and it's always a pleasure to hear you and talk to you.
Thank you, sir.
We were talking, or you were talking, about the migrants wanting to come into the UK.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's high time we had some discussion about the implications of all this. Tonight, for want of a cardboard box, people up and down the UK, even here in London, will die because they haven't got a cardboard box to wrap up and keep warm in. Meanwhile, year in, year out, Blairite councils up and down the UK have been demolishing our remaining council housing stock and selling the land off to property developers who often only advertise the properties in places like Hong Kong because they're only interested in foreign millionaires and billionaires buying them.
Many of whom never even live in them.
Quite. Indeed, you probably have to be a millionaire now to buy anything, even a shoebox in central London. We've seen them do it with such enthusiasm. They actually managed to lose money on the Aylesbury estate in Southwark. That's public money. Whether the Blairite council has made private money out of it or not, or stand to gain, we never know. We sometimes wonder. So, with this lack of housing, how do we explain housing these migrants to the poor guy who's going to die tonight for want of a cardboard box, freezing to death on the pavements here in the streets?
Well, look, Victor, that's very powerful. The first thing that needs to be said, though, is that the man in the cardboard box, or if he's unlucky because he doesn't have a cardboard box, is not on the street because of a migrant on the beach in Calais. He's on the street because of the economic and political system that we've got here and now. He was already on the street before a single illegal migrant landed on a southern beach. So it's important that we focus the blame for what's wrong in our own society on the people who are actually guilty of the conditions that many of our people are in. Millions of our people are in poverty. Millions of children are growing up in poverty. That's not the fault of an asylum seeker in Calais. That's the fault of the people that run and benefit from the political and economic system that we've got here. Having said which, it's actually not going to be improved, obviously, by the landing of illegal migrants. That goes without saying, or ought to go without saying. So it's not the answer to your question. It's an elaboration of the situation that we find ourselves in now. These migrants, because that's what the vast majority of them are. I represented constituents for almost 30 years in Parliament. In that time, I had to, because it was my duty to, make representation on behalf of thousands of people who were applying for political asylum. At least 95%, maybe 99% of them were not actually asylum seekers, or at least likely to succeed in their claim of asylum because they were, in fact, economic migrants, against which it should go without saying, I have not the remotest animus. If I was them, I'd be trying to get to Britain from a poorer place so that I might improve my life chances, the chances of my family to improve theirs. My own grandparents were economic migrants into this country. So clearly I have no animus towards them. I believe that this country needs controlled immigration. Controlled immigration. Not dinghies arriving on the beach, but controlled immigration that benefits our economy and the people already living here. That's a sane immigration policy. And as I've often said, I would prioritize the British Commonwealth from Australia to Zambia as the source of the limited number of immigrants allowed into Britain each year, according to the needs of our economy. And because we have a potential demographic time bomb ticking in this country, with not enough children, in a country where people live longer and longer, we obviously need either a big boost to the birth rate, or we need some migrants, or a combination of them both. I prefer the first. I want to boost our birth rate. I've done my bit on that as the father of 6 children. But if we want to have enough people of working age working and paying tax to keep us in our ever longer old age, then we have to do something about one or both of those fronts. But controlled immigration, Victor, is not people that you don't know, have no idea of their intentions, arriving on your beach, and if possible, and for many of them it is possible, to melt off, still in the hands of a criminal underground, to God knows where, to do God knows what. Victor, thanks for that call. Here's the first question of the evening. It's a difficult one. In 1895, the first motor race was held in the United States, over 55 miles from Chicago to Evanston and back. What was the winner's average speed? A, 23 miles an hour, B, 33 miles an hour, C, 7 miles an hour. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Peter says the Afghan people have lost, George. I thought you were better than this, to be honest. Give me a call, Peter. Tell me what you mean. And Oliver says, for some reason, George was on the jihadist side when it came to Yugoslavia. And that's the reason I will never trust him. I fought against the war on Yugoslavia with all my breath and all my heart. Me and Tony Benn and Jeremy Corbyn and others were practically the only people in this country opposing the war on Yugoslavia, the destruction of Yugoslavia. How dare you, you imbecile? If you have any guts, you'll pick up the phone right now and call this show and justify that utter slander. Really. And Yoda says, love the show, best entertainment and education on the airwaves.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
The answer is, extraordinarily, 7 miles an hour. That was the average speed of the very first motor race in the United States. But it was in 1895. The Victoria Embankment outside is not even going at 7 miles per hour because the road is blocked by Albanians celebrating their Independence Day. Now, there's not a police officer in sight. No one can get into the building. Now, I love Albanians. I was, believe it or not, with Steve Norris, the joint president of the Britain-Albania Society. And I celebrate their Independence Day wholeheartedly. They were, with Yugoslavia, practically the only country that liberated themselves from Nazi occupation and fascist occupation in the form of Mussolini, who was there first. But I'm not sure what London did to deserve to be brought to gridlock by Albanians celebrating their Independence Day. I hope it doesn't last all night. Now, a very noble and fine man is released from prison on Tuesday. A prison he should never have been in. I refer, of course, to the Honourable Craig Murray, the former British ambassador to Uzbekistan. That's right, a former British ambassador is currently in prison. He was imprisoned for telling the truth, and not even the whole truth, for he knew the whole truth and could have imparted it, but for the legal restrictions on him doing so. He didn't break the law, but he's been in prison. A man of such seniority and poor health has spent the last couple of months in a dungeon in Nicola Sturgeon's Scotland. One of a long line of people who have fallen foul of the government in Edinburgh. His crime was to be a supporter of the former nationalist First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmond, and to have stood up resolutely, as indeed I did myself, for Salmond's innocence. And when we were vindicated by a majority women jury who acquitted Salmond on every single count, that was not the end. And poor Craig was hunted down, prosecuted, and sent to prison. He comes out on Tuesday, I hope with his prison diaries in his satchel, which I hope will be a bestseller. And I extend now the invitation to him to join us next Sunday to talk about what must have been a searing experience for a man of his calibre to spend months in a Scottish Victorian dungeon. One of his stalwart supporters is Dr. Deepa Driver, who's also one of Julian Assange's stalwart supporters, as is the Honourable Craig Murray. Maybe the Julian Assange thing has more to do with what happened to the Honourable Craig Murray than we thought. Let's find out. Dr. Deepa Driver joins us now. Dr. Deepa, always a pleasure to see you. What news have you of Craig's release? When does he come out through the gates? Do you want people to go and greet him as he does? And what kind of health is he now in after what must have been a very grim experience?
Thanks, George. And thank you so much for constantly standing up for both Julian and Craig in all the forums that you're participating in. Craig will be out on Tuesday at 10 a.m. outside, and there is a protest, not a protest, a welcome party, so to speak, outside Saughton Prison in Edinburgh at 10 a.m.
Let me spell that for people, Doctor. It's Saughton. So please, if you can be there on Tuesday at 10 a.m. outside the prison gates to give a warm cheer to the Honourable Craig Murray, that would be terrific. Sorry, Doctor, please carry on.
No, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Craig is planning to give a speech when he comes out and share his experiences. He wrote to me a few weeks ago about the birthday event that we held for him online in his absence. And one of the things he says is that he's quite sure, having been in the prison, that the intention was to silence him. He's clearly been through a lot while in the prison. He says it is typical of British prisons, and that a number of people in the prison are, there are serial killers in there in the high security wing where he was based, and there are also a number of people largely suffering from addiction and deprivation. And typical of Craig, he's a very humane and kind man. He also has a good word for the prison staff there, who he says are coping with a very broken system. But one of the nicest things that he said was not only is, he knows he was put in there to make sure he was silenced and he was not around for Julian's extradition appeal hearings a few weeks ago. But although he was silenced temporarily, he's raring to go and he's looking forward to being with friends and supporters.
And in fact, Doctor, his voice will be amplified by this foolish... I mean, it's not just that what the Scottish judges did was wicked. It was also extremely stupid, because Craig will exit the prison with bigger platforms, with a louder voice, and I hope a best-selling book in his satchel. How stupid is that?
Well, you're absolutely right. I think many people see him as a hero, as somebody who has stood up for what's right and been punished for using very, very spurious reasons. For those of your viewers who don't know, Craig was convicted of contempt of court. You would think that that was because he revealed some of the names of Alex Salmond's accusers, which is what was prohibited by the court. But that's not why he was imprisoned. He didn't reveal any names. In fact, he was caught on a very, very arcane ruling of jigsaw identification, suggesting that Craig provided some information which, if put together with pieces of information that may have been in the public domain, could have potentially identified someone. So it's not clear to him or to us whom he identified, and it's not been made clear how he identified them. In fact, the way in which the judgment is constructed, it criminalizes journalism. It makes a difference between bloggers and independent journalists and those who work for the mainstream media. And it suggests that the mainstream media is somehow to be held in greater reverence because they are of a higher standard.
I told you they were stupid.
Indeed. I'm always cautious about saying that about a judge, but it does seem very cruel and vindictive, especially given that Craig was told that he wasn't allowed to serve community service because his health was too poor. And yet, for the last 4 months, he has been confined in Stockton prison.
His health was too poor to serve community service, but not so poor that he couldn't be thrown into a prison cell in a maximum security wing in a Victorian dungeon.
Indeed, and during COVID, when he has serious heart and other conditions. In fact, one of the nasty things they did about a week and a half ago was Craig had to go to the hospital for a medical appointment. And when he is a civil prisoner, what that means is he's not committed any criminal act. And just for your viewers, because criminal prisoners are let out on early release, Craig didn't benefit from that because the law in Scotland hasn't been correctly developed to allow civil prisoners to get the same benefits as criminal prisoners. Anyway, he's been in prison for 4 months, not got any of the benefits of being a civil prisoner. But then when he was supposed to go to the hospital, they strip searched him, and they wanted to manacle him as he went into Edinburgh Hospital. And it's a very humiliating experience for a man who, firstly, he has never tried to escape from prison. He has never jumped bail. He handed himself in. He's a civil prisoner. He's a non-violent prisoner. He's a peaceful man, a very highly intellectual man. And to find that he is treated in this absolutely despicable way, to humiliate and degrade him and drag him through the streets of Edinburgh in manacles, shows you how vindictive and cruel the system is. And this is certainly not the way Craig or indeed anybody else should be treated.
It's absolutely unspeakable. I did read that a British ambassador in prison on a civil matter, who would have been given community service if he had not been in such poor health. I'm racking up the contradictions here, should be handcuffed to go to hospital. It is beyond despicable, Doctor. It is maniacal. It is obscene. This latest chapter in the incarceration and persecution of the Honourable Craig Murray.
And, one of the things that we have to take away from this is that Craig, Julian, Stephen Dunziger in the US, Daniel Hale, the drone whistleblower in the US, David McBride, the Australian Defence Forces whistleblower who revealed serious criminality among Aussie forces in Iraq. All of these people are now in prison, imprisoned by the very criminals who are, causing havoc in the world, spending huge amounts of money on military budgets. I heard you say earlier to one of your listeners about the fact that the problems lie with the people in charge and how they run our economy and how they spend our money. And most of the money is being spent on military expenses to kill, bomb, and destroy people in the poorest countries of the world, hiring young men and women from this country who are in very poor conditions themselves and training them to be killers to go and destroy somebody else who has done nothing to them. So it is important that we stand with people like Craig and Julian, who, as you know, has been in Belmarsh prison. One of the horrific things if I may, I'll share with your listeners is that Julian, while he was in prison, was apparently given an HIV test. Now, most of us who know about the accuracy of these tests know that they are highly accurate. The test came back saying it was positive. And then when Julian was retested separately, it turned out that he was negative. So the amount of psychological torture the state is putting these people through, which seems, each one of these instances seem, maybe it's a small mistake, maybe it's a problem, maybe there's an issue. But actually, when you look at the big picture and look at what's happening time and time and time again, you realize that there is an intense amount of torture, an intense amount of focus put on journalists and whistleblowers, independent people, by those who are the real criminals. And we must stand up to them now.
The criminals have made it a crime to report on the criminal acts that they have carried out. That's the long and the short of it. Dr. Deepa, if you are talking with the Honourable Craig Murray, please give him the show's very best regards. I appreciate you coming on the show. A very important man's coming up next. You may not have heard of him yet, but you will. Arab Barghouti, after the news with Jamie Lowe.
Radio Sputnik News.
The taxi driver who survived the Liverpool bombing says it's a miracle he's alive, and he's thankful that no one else was injured in what he called such an evil act. David Perry was injured when a homemade device exploded shortly after he pulled up outside of Liverpool Women's Hospital last Sunday. The Iraq-born asylum seeker Imad al-Swilmeen, aged 32, who was a passenger in the taxi, died when his bomb exploded. Perry thanked the public for their amazing generosity since the blast. Police previously said the bomb was a homemade explosive with ball bearings attached. Perry escaped seconds before the vehicle was engulfed in flames and was taken to hospital, but has since been discharged. In a statement released through Counter-Terrorism Policing Northwest, he said he and his wife Rachel are completely overwhelmed with the messages of support in the wake of the Remembrance Sunday attack. Quote, "We would like to say thank you to everyone for your get well wishes and for your amazing generosity," he said. "I feel like it's a miracle that I'm alive and so thankful that no one else was injured in such an evil act." The Labour Party has accused Priti Patel of comprehensively failing on the issue of migrant crossings in the Channel after a record number of people arrived on British shores in small boats last week. Shadow Home Secretary Nick Thomas-Symonds said that his counterpart's incompetence on the issue is dangerous, but Health Secretary Sajid Javid defended the Home Secretary's work on the matter despite the surge in the number of crossings, saying the government has a, quote, great track record of providing security protection to those people who are genuinely fleeing prosecution. Manchester United today sacked manager Ole Gunnar Solskjaer following Saturday's 4-1 defeat at Watford. The club have won just one of their past 7 Premier League matches and are 7th in the table, 12 points behind leaders Chelsea. First-team coach Michael Carrick has been placed in temporary charge while United seek an interim manager to the end of the season. Quote, "It is with regret that we've reached this difficult decision," United said. The club's recent run of poor form includes a 5-0 thrashing by Liverpool on the 24th of October and a 2-0 defeat by Manchester City on the 6th of November. A gunman has opened fire in Jerusalem's Old City, killing 1 person and wounding at least 3 others. The gunman, who officials identified as a member of Hamas, was shot dead by Israeli security forces. 1 civilian shot by the gunman died of his wounds in hospital. Another was seriously hurt and 2 Israeli police officers were wounded, according to officials. Internal Secretary Minister Omer Bar-Lev said the attacker had a submachine gun. The attack took place near a gate to a compound in East Jerusalem that is a frequent flashpoint for violence. The location of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of Islam's most revered locations, and also the holiest site in Judaism, known as the Temple Mount. The attacker was identified as a 42-year-old Palestinian man from East Jerusalem. A spokesperson for Hamas confirmed the man, named in Palestinian and Israeli media as Fadi Abu Shaidam, was a member of the group's political wing. Sudan's ousted Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok has been reinstated following last month's coup when he was put under house arrest. He has appeared on TV to sign a new power-sharing agreement with the coup leader, Gen Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, amid continuing mass protests. The civilian coalition that nominated Hamdok as PM 2 years ago has refused to acknowledge any new deal. The pact has been struck with a gun to his head, a spokesperson said. On the streets of the capital, security forces have fired tear gas at protesters marching towards Khartoum's presidential palace, demanding the military's complete withdrawal from politics. Fresh unrest has erupted in the Netherlands against new lockdown rules amid rising COVID-19 cases in Europe. People hurled fireworks at police and set fire to bicycles in The Hague, one night after protests in Rotterdam turned violent and police fired shots. Thousands of demonstrators also took to the streets in Austria, Croatia and Italy as anger mounted over new curbs. The World Health Organization said it was very worried about rising coronavirus cases on the continent. Its regional director, Dr. Hans Klug, said that unless measures were tightened across Europe, 500,000 more deaths could be recorded by next spring. Quote, "COVID-19 has become once again the #1 cause of mortality in our region," he said, adding, "We know what needs to be done in order to fight the virus, such as getting vaccinated, wearing masks and using COVID passes." Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai has reportedly appeared as a guest at a tennis tournament in Beijing. A state media journalist posted a video clip on Twitter showing Miss Peng, 35, smiling while standing with officials and said it was from Sunday morning. However, international tennis officials say it's not enough to alleviate their concerns about her well-being. Miss Peng has not been seen since she made sexual assault allegations since the senior minister 2 weeks ago. And finally, a brown bear has been shot dead by a man hunting wild boar after it attacked and tore part of his leg off in southwestern France, according to reports. The 70-year-old is said to have fired his rifle twice in self-defense, killing the female animal instantly. He was airlifted to hospital by helicopter and is described as being in a serious condition. The authorities in France have launched an investigation into the incident, which happened near Say in Ariège yesterday afternoon. A member of the local hunting association told the news website La Dépêche, quote, "The bear attacked him and grabbed his leg, tore off his calf and injured him on the other leg too. One person managed to stop the bleeding until the arrival of help." He added, "It doesn't surprise me. They are coming closer and closer because there is nothing left to eat in the mountains." The attacker is set to reignite the debate over the reintroduction of brown bears to the Pyrenees. The move was a controversial one among farmers who believe the animals pose a threat to their livestock. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Call me. It's free speech here, and if you disagree with me, your call will be prioritized. If you're a woman caller, your call will be prioritized. If you're a first-time caller, your call will be prioritized. The number again in the UK is 08081965522. It's entirely free of charge. And if you're in the United States or Canada, equally free of charge, the number is +1 844 944 3344. Now, between the hammer of fast-moving world events in all kinds of theatres across the globe and the anvil of the increasing criminalisation of those of us who stand up for Palestinian rights and the Palestinian cause, as I have done since the early 1970s, the issue of Palestine is very much down the batting order of news coverage and attention from the political class in North America and in Britain over the last period. Now, we couldn't interview Palestine's Nelson Mandela, the man who should be the president of Palestine and may yet be the president of Palestine, because he is held under maximum security conditions. I refer, of course, to the great freedom fighter Marwan Barghouti. But we are able to talk to his increasingly active and growing influential son, Arab Barghouti, about the issue of prisoner exchanges, the hunger strikes that are going on, and whether or not his father, the Nelson Mandela of Palestine, might soon be free in a prisoner exchange. He joins me now. I hope the line is good. Arab Barghouti, welcome to the mother of all talk shows. Let's answer that last point first, if we can. It is, and has been for a long time, that Marwan, your father, has been right at the top of the list of Palestinian prisoners who need to be released in any prisoner exchange. I'm assuming that's still the case. We know that through Egypt and perhaps others, there are negotiations of such an exchange going on. Are you optimistic about those negotiations? Might you see your father sometime soon?
First of all, let me say that it's a true honor to be speaking to you personally. I'm a big fan, and you've been a fierce defender of the rights of the Palestinian people. And I think this is something that used to be rare, but fortunate enough, I think that the voices of the people that are speaking for the Palestinians are raising, thanks to people like you. For the issue of the Palestinian political prisoners, I think that my father has been, advocating for the rights of the Palestinians for 4 decades now. And I think that he is a well-recognized Palestinian leader in the eyes of the whole world. And the proof is that he has a very successful international campaign, and he has a very successful campaign even in Palestine that has been always active for the past 20 years. Of course, we're optimistic. We have always been optimistic, not because things are showing positivity on the Israeli government side, who controls everything that goes in and out of this land, but because we have no other choice, to be honest. I was 11 years old when my father was arrested. Now I'm 31. I went through my life while my father was still in prison, and his fault is that he's a freedom fighter who's been advocating for Palestinians' rights for decades, and I don't think they succeeded to quiet his voice. He's someone who will never, ever stop advocating for our rights as Palestinian people. But of course, for the prisoner swap issue, we're very optimistic that, as it happened 10 years ago when there was a swap between the Palestinians and the Israelis with Gilad Shalit, and 1,000 Palestinians were released as political prisoners. We're very optimistic that this will be the case very soon, because if you really think about it, the history says that the Palestinian political prisoners get released one of two ways. First of all, a political breakthrough solution, which does not seem to be happening, especially with the far-right Israeli government that hasn't been giving any chances for the Palestinians to do any moves. And the other thing is the prisoner swap. And I think this is something that we're very optimistic, and we hope that it happens, because like any other Palestinian family that has suffered from the absence of our loved ones, we're not special. There are thousands of Palestinian families who suffer from this. And knowing the pain on the personal level, on the family level, I know for a fact that these political prisoners, freedom fighters, deserve their freedom. And unfortunately, it came down to a swap. But of course, we'll take that, because all we need is for them to come back to their loved ones.
Well, I knew your father well, and I know your mother. Of course, I haven't seen your father for 20 years, but I am attached to them by a sacred bond, and I will never stop advocating for the cause, but also your father's potential unique role in that cause, because it seems to me that Palestinian division is now chronic. I mean that literally in the medical sense. It is chronic, it is everlasting, it is ongoing, and it is completely debilitating. But Marwan Barghouti can traverse all of the factions, all of the currents of political opinion. Therefore, it would be in the world's interest for him to be released, so that he can play a part in the political and ultimately negotiating process that will have to, if this conflict is ever going to come to an end. How strongly is that felt inside Palestine, do you think?
I think if you look at the polls in the last 20 years, he's considered the most popular leader amongst Palestinians. And I don't think that happened because he promised us Palestinians of, building schools or doing things or stuff like that. He's still in a cell and has been in a cell for 2 decades. And this gives you the amount of loyalty the Palestinian people have towards him, and not only towards him, because he represents an idea more than he represents himself as a person. He represents an idea of Palestinian political prisoners that have given their lives and sacrificed everything just to give us any type of freedom. And he's someone who's played his political role even inside prison. And the biggest proof of that is that he was the head of Fatah list back in 2006. And he's been a parliament member in the 2 rounds of the Palestinian elections. He was elected twice to the highest committee of Fatah party as the highest, of course, getting the highest votes. And this tells you, and of course, he's one of the people who made the prisoners' agreement that was signed between all parties. And this is exactly why people respect him. This is exactly why people think he's a need for the future of the Palestinian people, because his voice in the unity of Palestinians. You mentioned the division. I think the division is something that is shameful for the Palestinian people, and the responsibility goes on the leadership of both parties, Fatah and Hamas, and he has been trying his best to play a role in solving this division, because it only serves the occupation. And I think if we really want our real independence as Palestinians, we need leaders who are calling for the unity of the Palestinian people, and he has never stopped to call for the unity of the Palestinian people. And I think the future holds that my father will play a role in the Palestinian politics, because he's been a politician his whole life. And I think exactly what the Israeli propaganda is trying to label him. They are trying to label him as a terrorist and blood on his hands and stuff like that. And we've heard that a lot about any leader that is trying to resist the Israeli occupation. You have 2 kinds of leaders in Palestine. You have the leaders that are cooperating with the occupation, shamefully cooperating with the occupation, and those leaders will be thrown away in the Palestinian history. And you have the leaders who are giving and sacrificing everything they got for the freedom of their people. And he's, of course, in the second category, and the biggest proof is that he lost many years in Israeli prisons. He was exiled for years outside of Palestine, and I don't think if he had anything left of him to give to the Palestinian people, he will always give that.
How do people follow you? Are you on social media? How do they support the campaign that you are seeking to build?
So we have a page on Facebook called Marwan Barghouti. I hope everyone can, in English, and I hope everyone can follow that page. We have an international campaign for the release of Marwan Barghouti and all the Palestinian political prisoners, and we have the support of many people around the world. I've been personally to Europe many times to work on these campaigns, especially in France. My mother, as you mentioned, has been everywhere, South America, Europe, South Africa, where she launched the campaign with Desmond Tutu, and I think people can follow that on our page there.
Give your mother, and if you can, your father, my deepest regards, my salam, and my pledge that I'll never stop talking on their behalf and on behalf of all of the Palestinian prisoners. Arab Barghouti, thank you for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Camera 4 is this one, and I've got a question. In 1976, Fidel Castro became president of Cuba? What was the name of his brother who replaced him? A. Raul, B. Miguel, C. Octavio. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Preferred the old format where George was actually writing his own monologue. For you.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
The answer, of course, is Raul Castro, who succeeded his brother Fidel as the president of Cuba. Now, how's the poll doing? My goodness, 2,000 people nearly. Will you be wishing people A, Merry Christmas, 93%, or B, Happy Holidays, 7%? That's a little different on YouTube. Merry Christmas, 83 as opposed to 93. Happy Holidays, 17 as opposed to 7. And on Telegram, 85%. Merry Christmas, 15%. Happy Holidays. You can vote, I think, right up to the end of this hour. Let's try and bust the standing record on that. The numbers again, please call 08081 965522 if you're in the United Kingdom. And if you're in the US or Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It's entirely free in both territories. Joan Quilter says, hello, I watched your show on Facebook and thoroughly enjoyed it. I used to watch you on RT, but RT was discontinued on our television channels. In the interests of freedom, of course. Joan Quilter, I live in California. All the best to you too, Joan. And Thomas in Glasgow says, hi George, great show. I look forward to you interviewing Philippe Arguiller, that's Argillier, who has world data banks with on the shadow world government. He states that he was invited to a meeting with them in 2015 to participate in setting up the COVID-19 pandemic. This is the kind of issue that demands your attention. And Mohammed Tony Griggs says, hi George, no Muslims in Dubai are offended by Christmas. Christmas is embarrassed. The malls in Dubai are full of Christmas decorations. Indeed, quite so. Let's take a call from Mike in the Bahamas. Go ahead, Mike.
Hello, George. How are you?
All good. Thank you very much.
Well, I want to wish you and your audience a very American happy holidays. Now, I grew up in the U.S., even though I'm a dual national, and I can remember even in the 70s, people said happy holidays. This phony war on Christmas started in Fox News in the early part of the century. It doesn't exist.
But
I mean, I think this is so trivial.
Why is it? Well, it's offensive to people in Britain who are being...
Why is it offensive? It wasn't offensive. Why all of a sudden did Fox News try to make it offensive in America?
I was just about to explain...
people have been using it.
Hold on. I was just about to explain to you why it's offensive. Because in this country, people of all faiths call it Christmas. And they wish each other Christmas wishes. And they don't like the Americanization of Great Britain. You can call it Happy Holidays if you like. You could call yesterday or 2 days ago Black Friday if you like. You can practice your Halloween if you like. But we don't want it here. And we resent that the British civil service is handing out guidance to British civil servants, telling them that they should not use the term Happy Christmas because it will offend Muslims, when it doesn't offend Muslims. I've never met a Muslim whom it offended. So we don't want Muslims to be blamed for the abolition of the word Christmas, and we don't, much as we love America, we don't want to become Americans. Over to you, Mike.
Well, first of all, as a U.S. UK dual national, I don't object to the Americanization of the UK, but that's another story. I lived in the UAE for 5 years, and the biggest Christmas tree I ever saw was in the Emirates Palace hotel.
Quite. So why,
yes, it was
why abolish it in Britain? Why have Christmas in Dubai, but not here in Britain?
Well, you're sure that this is an actual thing. You've seen the memo.
It's all over the newspapers. Trust me, Mike, I'm not making it up.
Well, I don't know. I just see it as such a non-issue.
Well, plainly not, but then you don't mind the Americanization of the United Kingdom, so you're already a rare bird.
Well, I spent the first 42 years of my life in the U.S., even though I'm a dual national. So, culturally,
well, we're lucky to have you. We're lucky to have you, Mike. Let's go to Minnesota and talk to Abdi. Go ahead, Abdi.
Assalamu alaikum, George. How are you today?
Wa rahmatullah barakatuh. How would you like to follow that from Mike in the Bahamas? Are you offended?
Definitely.
Are you offended by me wishing you or someone else a Merry Christmas?
I'm not offended, but I am offended by you guys trying to push this thing onto the government that are trying to include others, including Muslims, saying let's respect our other faiths and not go over all this crap. As a Muslim that work in the British servant, civil servants, as you guys call it, as a Muslim, George, do they ever celebrate Ramadan or Eid with the Muslims that live in Britain? Yes or no?
Well, yeah, actually, increasingly, people will wish Ramadan Mubarak to people on the Eid.
But it's not official, right?
Hold on.
It's not official, right?
Well, no, I think Muslims, by and large, take Eid as a holiday and with the best wishes of everybody else. But Muslims are a tiny minority here. Christians are an overwhelming majority here. And they believe that Christmas is important to them. And most Muslims are sensible enough to wish them well, on Christmas. Why do we want to divide our people?
Yes, but the thing is, It's not division. It's having inclusion of everybody that lives in the country. Yes, Christianity is majority, but there's a larger number of Muslims that live in the country.
Well,
the
there's 2 million.
Is Muslim.
There's 2 million Muslims in Britain out of 70 million people. So it's a small percentage, but a percentage which lives among us and whose faith has to be respected.
Definitely. So, George, I want to move on to the immigration point as well, that you lamented earlier.
Go on.
I was going to ask you to say, would it be healthy for all of us if we say all the white people that live in Africa move back to wherever you came from, all the Africans and Muslims go back to wherever you live, and you guys leave us alone?
No,
because it seems to me, the way you analyzed it, I mean, that's an ideal world.
No,
but it seems to me the way you analyzed it.
Well, Abdi, it wouldn't be healthy, and it wouldn't happen. The whole ethos of Nelson Mandela and the South African government was that they wanted everyone that was in South Africa to stay there. And I want everyone that's in Britain to stay here. But I don't want to solve the problems of Somalia by bringing Somalia to Britain, or Afghanistan by bringing Afghanistan to Britain. We do need legal, controlled immigration, but we'll pick and choose who we allow to come in. That's our right, and I think it's a right that should be respected. What say you?
George.
Yeah.
Can you hear me well?
Yes, very well. The whole world is listening.
Yes, George. So let me say this. Few years ago, the government of Britain and the USA have landed all over the shores of the world without any invitation.
Sure.
The same thing that we are landing on your shores today. Nobody asked them their agenda. Nobody asked them their evolution will or what they have intention in their mind. Just as you mentioned, your great-grandfather immigrated, was economic and immigrant. Nobody asked him, why are you today closing the door on those that are coming in and saying, I want to know where you come from, I want to know why you are here?
Well, first of all, I don't need any lessons from you about opposing the imperialist wars of the 21st century and in the 20th century, because I think you know I was an opponent of those wars and remain so. The difference is this, that mass immigration is bad for the countries from which the immigrants are leaving and bad for the country or countries in which the immigrants are arriving. First of all, it strips the almost always much poorer countries of the brightest and the best and the youngest and the hardest working and the most adventurous and entrepreneurial. It takes all these sectors away from the poor country that they are leaving. If you don't believe me, walk into any hospital in Britain and see the people from poor countries who are working, looking after us in our health service. Who's looking after the poor and the sick in the poor countries that they have left? God only knows.
But yes,
it is bad. Hold on, I'll let you in. It is bad for us because we are already suffering a lack of housing, a low level of wages, pressure on our schools, on our health service. And we cannot accept large numbers of people from elsewhere because that will only add to those problems. It will only drive wages down further. It will only make school places more scarce because we have a government and we have a system that has already broken millions of our people. And that can never be repaired if you add to that injury a flood of people from poor countries who will merely exacerbate the problem. Last word to you, Abdi.
Okay. Since you mentioned South Africa, right now as we speak, there are white South Africans that are arguing to have their own country from the black South Africans. Just for your FYI.
But,
secondly,
that's always been true, but it will never happen. Go on.
But right now, it looks like it. To be honest with
It
you,
will
with
never
this
happen.
rhetoric,
It will never happen. Go on. Stop setting
hopefully
up.
they will leave there. They will leave there before
Stop
that
building up
happens.
straw men so you can knock them down. Get to your point.
Okay, so my point is, do you agree with me right now? I agree with you. Everything you said, 110%, all the problems you mentioned exist in your countries. Right now, if we ask your government to stop meddling in our countries and say, you know what?
You're asking
stop
me
giving
that?
money to those.
Abdi,
Huh?
Abdi, you're
Yes.
asking me that question? Me?
No, I know you know. I wanted the rest of the world to know. So
All
we
right.
can put it
Well,
out.
now they do. Now they do.
I know.
No, they do. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Let's go to another caller who's just disappeared. Terence in Norwich. Go ahead, Terence.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. How are you?
By the grace of God, I'm good. Thank you. What would you like to say?
On me. First of all, slightly digressing to Abdi's comment, there's the biggest Somalian community in Wales outside Somalia, I believe, and they've been there for 4 to 5 generations. So
I used to live
there are
in
lots
a place in London which had the tallest population in Britain, and that's because it was the home of a large number of Somalis.
Yeah, but you know when you hear a Cardiff Somali talking with a Welsh accent, it's wonderful. Anyway, my main point is Marwan Barghouti, who I followed for many years, probably as long as you because of my politics, and you know I just like to tell his boy Arab that he's not alone. I mean, the small little island of Ireland, the party Sinn Féin has advocated for the expulsion of the Israeli ambassador for many years. But because you've got the rotating Taoiseach show there, Martin and Varadkar, which are complicit in everything that's not doing the Irish Republic or the island of Ireland any good, I just want Mr. Barghouti to tell his father that Sinn Féin stand by him resolutely in the apartheid state that is Israel at the moment. And I found it very heartwarming that his boy is as strong as his father. And that's great going forward.
It is, yeah. He was a kid the last time I saw him. Now he's a 31-year-old man, and a credit to his mother and father. I'm sure he's still listening. So thanks very much, Terence, for that.
My pleasure, Mr. Galloway.
I appreciate it very much. Brian is in Glasgow on the Craig Murray question. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, how you doing, George? George, when I'm watching that and that lady talk about... and what amazes me when people talk about how, for example, in this case, humiliation, if that's happening, what that is forensic evidence of malfeasance in public office. Now, the reason why I say this, I have, and I've got records, so the first people I speak to are the police. I send them a complaint, both by phone, and I've got tapes of doing this, trying to charge, get to investigate the Scottish Parliament for seeking royal assent for acts of parliament that don't comply with ECHR. And here's the rub, George. You will not, in the whole of the UK, be able to find a lawyer, a QC, trained, you name any of the big ones, and ask them to come on your television and discuss with me acts that don't comply with ECHR that are on the statute just now, and you won't be able to find them.
I know I won't, but I have given you so many opportunities to make exactly that point, Brian. I'll have to bid you good night on that, because we really can't keep getting the same call all the time. Rosa Parks was arrested in Montgomery, Alabama in this week in 1955 for refusing to give up her seat to a white person. Where was she at the time? In a diner, in college, or on a bus? Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
call. Go ahead, Kenny.
Hi, George. Yeah, I just want to talk about the trans issue that you were speaking about earlier. I've got a book in front of me by Douglas Murray, and he's got a paragraph here I'd just like to read out, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was standing on the corner at a quarter.
All right, I'll get him off. He's a nutter. In the UK, it's 08081 965 522, and in the US, it's +1 844 944 3344.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Rosa Parks, of course, refused to give up her seat on the bus. Although it could equally have happened in a diner or in college, for all of them were segregated. Now, we almost made it. You'll recall that last week I told you that the podcast was listened to in 98 countries, and I asked you, try and get me to 100 countries. In fact, we got to 99. So our podcast, which is the distilled version of the mother of all talk shows, was listened to in 99 countries last week, getting us ever closer to that magic 100. The beautiful Caribbean island of Antigua joined the worldwide community that downloaded last week's episode. Thank you, Antigua, who will be the 100th country or territory to download our podcast. A thanks, by the way, to our listeners in Hong Kong, who took us into their political top 10 again this week. So if you're not listening to this 5-star chart-topping behemoth that is the MOATS podcast, please subscribe so you can take MOATS on the go with you and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you're a Spotify user, please follow us and share with your friends so that more people can enjoy MOATS. Let's see if we can reach 100 countries next week. That would be some achievement, by the way, if we got there. Let me hear from my good friend in Manchester, which I've just left. It's Richard in Manchester. Go ahead, Rich.
Good evening, George. Thank you ever so much. I do really appreciate you letting me have some time on air with you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I'm so pleased that Craig Murray is coming out. We fought very, very hard. We couldn't stop it because I think he was illegitimately put in prison for backing Salmond, and they came up with a Trump charge.
We'll probably get thrown in prison for saying so, Richard, but you're absolutely right.
It's an absolute diabolical thing that they've done to him, but I hope he comes out and enjoys his young family and that he gets on very well, and I hope he carries on as he was doing before.
Oh, I'm sure he will. I mean, if the attempt was to silence him, it will achieve the precise opposite.
Exactly, because he could, with the book as you're advocating, written, then I'm sure that will be a world bestseller. George, can I ask you, I'm very sorry about the loss of life of the Muslims in the channel.
Well, I don't know that they were all Muslims. They were, there's only 2 or 3 of them, I think, been named up to now, but they were people who were trying to migrate to our country, and they lost their lives. And it's important that we pay proper respect to those people, but also that we name the culprits. And the culprits, contrary to what many people have said, are not Britain.
I would agree with that, and that's what I wanted to speak to you about, because people like Napoleon Macron is fighting for his political life to get another 4 or 5 years as president of France. And then you have Barnier. And
what a choice that would be, Richard.
Pardon me?
What a choice that would be, Macron or Barnier.
My God.
The devil or the deep blue sea. I mean, really.
He's fighting Barnier to become the president on the premise that they will stop immigration into France for 5 years after all he did to pull this country back from a legal vote that we had to get out of the EU, and he kicked us around like a football, and now he wants to go on a non-immigration ticket for 5 years. You couldn't write that script, George, could you?
To mix a metaphor, it's a Dutch auction in France between who can be meaner to Johnny Foreigner than the other. Meanwhile, almost literally pushing the dinghies into the English Channel. They could stop this in a minute. They could go round every store in northern France and forbid them to sell dinghies to anyone whose identity they did not have and passed on to the authorities. They could go around and they could puncture every gang's dinghy that they come across. They could use their navy to stop illegal exit from their country, because just as these people illegally want to enter Britain, they are illegally exiting France. They may be criminals, they may be wanted, maybe there's a warrant out for their arrest. How can you tell? You're allowing them illegally to exit your country. France is playing a despicable game in all of this. Meanwhile, conducting, as I say, a Dutch auction to see who can be harder on immigration into France. Last word to you, Rich.
Well, the only thing I can say is the quicker it's done, the better, and we can get on with the fact that we have now Brexited 17.4 million in a legitimate democratic vote, and I think that should be carried on, that we have legal, organised immigration, which you've touched on already tonight, George, and thank you very much indeed for having me on your show.
A pleasure. Thanks for calling. Let's go to Eve in Idaho, another good friend of the show. Eve, what would you like to say?
Thank you, George. I wanted to talk about Ukraine, and before I wanted to ask the question, you know, I asked myself the question, if you are a neoconservator, what is a victory, a geopolitical victory? And I would say for a neoconservator, if you can pick a battlefield which is 10 miles from your adversary and 5,000 miles from you, if you can inflict some big loss there, if you can get out of it some military bases, then you won. And what's happening in Ukraine right now is that the neoconservators, they think, well, we don't care about Donbass, so we can set up a war there. We can put some damage. We can, for instance, blow up Nord Stream during the altercation. Then we negotiate. We lose the Donbass. We have a good case to make Ukraine part of NATO. We put bases there, and we won. And now Putin came up with something new. And he told the American, well, you know, there is one thing in your neighborhood that I can damage really seriously, is space. You know, space, it's a few hundred miles from where you are. And if you mess up with my neighborhood, I'm going to push on a button and I'm going to wipe out all your military satellites. And I think he got the attention of the United States. That's what I wanted to say.
Well, one hopes so. You'll recall the hysterical lying hysterically done by the United States government and its poodles across the mainstream media that Russia was about to invade Ukraine. They even gave a timetable. The US State Department said they thought that Russia was going to invade Ukraine within the next 2 weeks, they said. The Russian government stated today it absolutely denies it has any intention of invading Ukraine. Why would anybody want to invade Ukraine? The reason they won't let them in the EU is because it is a basket case, because it would be a weight on the back of the EU almost impossible to bear. Why would Russia want to occupy Ukraine? It has no intention of invading Ukraine. But what cannot be ruled out, as you've just very well demonstrated, is Ukraine invading Russia. Ukraine invading the millions of Russian people who live in the Donbass, who live in the eastern Ukraine, whose language has been delegitimized, no longer recognized as an official language of the state. You cannot rule out Ukraine, egged on by the United States and other NATO powers, making an attack on the Russian people in the Donbass. Am I right?
Yeah, you're completely right. You know, the story, the way you can summarize the story of Russia after 1990 is that Gorbachev was the guy who did fool me once, shame on you. And now Putin is telling the West, fool me twice, shame on me.
Yeah, very well put. Very succinctly put. Thanks for that, Yves. Now, the poll is closed. Thousands of you voted to continue saying Merry Christmas. 93% of you, as against 7%, including that fella from the Bahamas who's a dual national, even though he doesn't object to the Americanization of the United Kingdom. Here's a call from Detroit. Anthony is in Detroit. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Anthony.
Hey, George. Well, season's greetings. How about that?
That'll do. That'll do. That's the best I'm going to get from an American, I think.
Yeah, I mean, what the heck? I mean, I love Christmas, but we got to get real. I mean, Amazon and Jeff Bezos is Santa now. I mean, it already is commercialized, and freaking Coca-Cola created Santa as we know it. So
exactly.
It's too far gone. I mean, you know, Fox News has been pushing with Bill O'Reilly and Laura Ingraham and their war on Christmas for some time, decades, and it's kind of goofy, you know. But
you know, as I said earlier, Anthony, it's your business. Bill O'Reilly might be distantly related to me, by the way. But what goes on in your country and the language that you use is obviously a matter for you. What we object to is that it's now coming over here. You know the old saying in the 40s, the Americans, they're overpaid, oversexed, and over here. Well, we don't mind the friendship of the people of the United States. We just don't want to be in the United States or be Americans. I know it's hard for some Americans to understand why people wouldn't want to be like them, but we don't. Trust me.
Wow. Well, you know, I could understand that. You know, there's the separation, but I think there's one thing we could have in common is, you know, I have a close family member who's worked for the federal government here for 30 years, and I'm surprised the only guidelines that weren't given for bureaucrats were bah humbug. That's what I'd expect.
Very good point. Now, what do you mean Fox News is conducting a war on Christmas? You mean they talk about the war on Christmas?
Yeah, it's like the Streisand effect, really. I mean, how does the war on Christmas stack up to the war on terror, or the war on drugs, or how about now the war on COVID? I don't think the war on Christmas is some low-level stuff compared to that.
All right, Anthony, thanks for that. Dell is in London. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Dell.
Yeah, hi, George. Yeah, I've been listening to you all day. I'd like to, if I can find it, just say one little thing about the. What do you think about the Austria camps and all this? Everyone locking down, right? So, because you are a very open man, yeah, and you have been slating so many people. Well, not slating, it's not a fair word, but you're a very honest man. I want to hear what you think about the Austria camps.
I don't know anything about Austria camps, but I did say last week on this very show that Austria was behaving in a tyrannical manner, which had echoes of how they had acted before. In the 1930s, even before Hitler's Anschluss of Austria, Austria was a proto-fascist country, and it behaved like it. And it should not be acting in a way now on the forced vaccination of people, on the vaccine passports and all of that. It should not be acting in the way that it is acting, because it does bring back, certainly for someone my age, some very, very ugly memories of how they were before. Del, thanks for that call. Let me give you some social media from Gerard White. I was in Japan in the 1980s when Christmas was adopted as a commercial event. In an upmarket store in Tokyo, they had a Christmas window display in which they had a figure of Santa hanging on a cross. Oh, dear God. Kevin from Dallas says Happy Holidays has been used in the US for decades, not because Merry Christmas is offensive to Muslims, which it is not, but because Hanukkah is around the same time as Christmas, and because there have long been all manner of non-Christians in the US. Muslim immigration to the US is relatively recent. Thanks, Kevin, in Dallas. Tom Orr says, I wonder if the fact that Craig was about to testify in Spain about how Julian Assange was being spied on had anything to do with the bogus case against him. And Ash Priest says, Merry Christmas from Buddhist Thailand. Ash, thank you very much. Mike is in South Carolina, who thinks I'm becoming irrelevant, but he's still watching, we're glad to say. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I do still watch and listen, and it's interesting. But I'm watching a conversion of you. Seems to be you moving very, very far to the conservative side. In fact, your opinions on immigration and stuff are starting to match Joe Biden and Donald Trump's almost.
Are you
exactly.
in favor of unlimited immigration, Mike?
Well, you know what I'm actually in favor of.
Why are you stumbling on that? Why are you stumbling over that question? Are you in favor? Are you in favor of open borders?
Well, George, let me put it this way: you were up until very recently part of the European Union, which absolutely had open borders.
Yeah, you're a part of the United States of America, which has open.
See what I'm saying, George?
You have open borders.
Wait, listen to me.
And we had open borders. No, because you started with a baseless insult against me.
It's not baseless. It's not baseless.
So I'm asking you, and kindly answer
Don't cut me off, George.
A basic question. Are you in favor of open borders?
Yes, I'm absolutely, George, I'm absolutely in favor of open borders.
That's enough. That's enough. That's why. That's why you don't like me. That's why you don't like me.
George,
because you're either a Trotskyite,
you were my hero,
or you're a liberal, or you're a free market capitalist. Because they're the only people. No, I can't. The news is coming up in a few seconds.
Let me speak.
No, I can't let you speak anymore because the news is about to be declared. And we played last week's news in the last hour. This week's news is coming up with Jamie Lowe, and it's bang up to the minute. Mike in South Carolina likes me, but thinks I'm irrelevant. But he's still watching and still listening. That's all we ask. Keep watching and keep listening. Now, Chris Hedges is up after the news. You definitely don't want to miss him, because he is the smartest man in America. After the news with Jamie Lowe.
Radio Sputnik News.
Scotland's First Minister has said that travel restrictions may need to be tightened further in the coming days due to the new Omicron COVID variant, including travel between Scotland and England. 10 countries in southern Africa have been added to the red list due to concerns about the new variant, with PCR tests for all incoming travellers. But Nicola Sturgeon said she thought more action may be needed amid concerns about the new variant. She said, quote, "We must be open-minded to doing anything to keep people safe." From 4 o'clock on Tuesday morning, it's expected that people travelling into the UK from any destination will have to take a PCR test by the end of the second day after arrival and self-isolate until they get a negative result. And anyone who comes into contact with a case of Omicron will have to self-isolate even if they've had both vaccine doses. UK Health Secretary Sajid Javid said that Britain could not have acted more swiftly in response to the new variant. However, Nicola Sturgeon said that although rules were being introduced as quickly as possible, she added, quote, "I think we may need to go further in restricting travel in the days to come. I hope I'm wrong, but we must keep our minds open to that." Asked if this might mean new restrictions on travel between Scotland and England, she said this would be a last resort, adding, quote, "We need to be open-minded to doing anything to keep the population safe." The new coronavirus variant Omicron has been detected in 13 people who arrived in the Dutch capital of Amsterdam on 2 flights from South Africa. They are among 61 passengers who tested positive for coronavirus. It comes as tighter restrictions come into force in the Netherlands amid record COVID cases and concerns over the new variant. This includes early closing times for hospitality and cultural venues and limits on home gatherings. Omicron was first reported to the World Health Organization by South Africa on Wednesday. Israel is to ban foreigners from entering the country for 14 days and use surveillance to halt the spread of the new COVID variant, local media reports. The ban is expected to come into effect at midnight tonight, following full cabinet approval. Israel has so far confirmed 1 case of the potentially more infectious Omicron variant. Many countries have since banned travel to South Africa and its neighbours. The South African doctor who first spotted the new COVID variant Omicron says patients seen so far have had extremely mild symptoms. Dr. Angelique Coetzee added that more time is needed before we know the seriousness of the disease for vulnerable people. Britain's Home Secretary Priti Patel has warned that failure by European politicians to cooperate on the continent's migrant crisis will lead to even worse scenes in the English Channel this winter. France is hosting German, Belgian and Dutch ministers and European Commission officials for talks. Patel was disinvited from the summit after a row between Prime Minister Boris Johnson and French President Emmanuel Macron. Labour accused them of, quote, engaging in a blame game while children drown. On Wednesday, 27 people died as they headed for the UK from France. Their boat sank in the Channel. The International Organisation for Migrants said it was the biggest single loss of life in the Channel since it began collecting data in 2014. Czech President Miloš Zeman has appointed the opposition leader Peter Fiala as the country's new Prime Minister. Zeman, who tested positive for coronavirus last week, made the appointment from inside a plexiglass box in a stateroom at his residence. The president was wheeled in by hospital staff in full protective gear. Czech rules require a positive patient to observe 2 weeks of self-isolation. He caught COVID just after a spell in intensive care for unrelated problems. The 77-year-old is a heavy smoker and former heavy drinker who uses a wheelchair and suffers from diabetes. The Queen will have one less realm to reign over next week when Barbados severs its final imperial links to Britain by removing the 95-year-old as its head of state and declaring itself a republic. The former British colony, which gained independence in 1966, revived its plan to be a republic last September, with the country's Governor-General, Sandra Mason, saying, quote, "The time has come to fully leave our colonial past behind." 73-year-old Mason will be sworn in as the first ever president of the island nation of just under 300,000 at a ceremony tomorrow night. A council in Australia appears to be set effectively to ban cats from being outdoors unless they are on a lead. Planned changes to laws in Fremantle, Western Australia, would see felines prohibited from all council-owned areas, including roads, verges and bushlands. Members of the council voted to approve proposals tabled by the councillor Aidan Lang on the basis that it would protect wildlife and remove the risk of cats being hit by cars. And finally, a New Zealand MP cycled to hospital early today while in labour, only to give birth an hour later. Quote, "I genuinely wasn't planning to cycle in labour, but it did end up happening," Julianne Genter said on Facebook afterwards. The Green Party spokesperson for transport was not doing this for the first time. She was a minister 3 years ago when she took a similar trip. Genter, age 41, is a well-known and outspoken cycling advocate. The US-born politician said her contractions weren't that bad when she and her husband decided to cycle. She posted a picture of the couple in the hospital car park. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, it's mainly your hour, this one. Get as many calls and as much social media in as possible. And we're having a little bit of difficulty temporarily in reaching Chris Hedges. So there might be room for more calls than normal. There's also social media. But we all have to drop everything and make way because there's a legend on the line. Earlier than usual, it's Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. I'm a bit confused with you tonight. What is the legal way to apply for asylum? Because I don't know what the legal way is. I mean, I'm pretty ignorant, but I don't know what the legal way is.
If you're talking about the ones that are coming across the channel, then...
No, I just want to know. No.
Yeah, well, no, because it would be different if they were fleeing war-torn Ethiopia right now.
Yeah.
There would be no easy legal way to do that in Ethiopia. But there is in France, and there is in Belgium. There's a British embassy in France, and there are British consulates in many parts of France. And anyone seeking political asylum in Britain should go into the embassy or a consulate and present themselves as someone seeking political asylum in Britain. They'll have a difficulty explaining why, when they're already in a safe country, they want to move on to another. But they could do so, and they could claim, for example, that they have family members already settled in Britain and so on. There are many ways that that can be done. But the illegal way is to leave a safe country and illegally arrive on the beach at Dover or Folkestone or the rest. It's doubly illegal when they then do a runner up the beach and into the country without anyone knowing who they are or where they're going.
Yeah, the thing is, they do, our country and our people or wherever, you know, they never tell you exactly what is the safe way to do it. The government doesn't say, oh, actually, you know, you go into the embassy in France or the consulate and you could get, you know, explain why you're coming. Mm-hmm. They don't make that.
Well, but the reason they don't do that, Norma, is that 95% of them would fall at the first hurdle. When their application was processed from France, they would not be allowed into Britain because they are not political refugees.
Yeah, but say this is an example. Say you want to become from Afghan, you're fleeing from the Taliban, get your rights, and you know it's all a terrible thing that may be happening to you, especially if you're a woman.
Yeah, well, that's a good example you've given.
You couldn't, yeah, but you couldn't actually. Could you get over and could you apply to the embassy?
You can apply to the British embassy, consulate, anywhere in the first country that you arrived at, and it's a good example that you give. Because actually, a higher percentage of Afghan migrants are likely to be genuine political refugees because there's just been a civil war there and a lot of people were collaborating with us as the illegal foreign occupier of that country, they would have a better shout. But you can't have all of Afghanistan turning up in Folkestone, Norma.
No, I know.
You know that.
But the other,
you know that.
Well, of course, I mean that.
What would your neighbours think of that? I mean, you might be splendidly liberal, but
I don't know what I am, George.
I don't think your neighbours would want half of Afghanistan arriving in Bristol.
No, but on the other hand, we've just told Hong Kong, because there's been trouble there.
Yeah.
And they have a legal way, quite thousands of them, to come over here.
Yeah, hundreds of thousands. Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
Which
So
I
it's a
opposed
bit-
at the time. You'll recall the show in which I thundered against it. But you're right, it's a double standard for sure.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. And the last point really is, there are people who are desperate, they run away, and they may be more in need, perhaps, you won't agree with me, to get asylum by coming over illegally. And they probably need more.
Depends what you mean by need. There are
they're very frightened, you know.
Norma, you've drunk the liberal Kool-Aid, I'm afraid. There are billions.
I'm original.
There are billions of people, billions, who are in need. We cannot accommodate them in Britain. We've got our own people in need.
Yeah, I realise that. It's just there are some freedoms from persecution that even
if they're facing persecution, then they may well have a case for political asylum. But most of them are not facing persecution. Most of them are coming here for the same reason that my grandparents did, because they'll get a better life in Britain or Germany or France than they have in Iraqi Kurdistan. Although Iraqi Kurdistan...
you've made that.
Yeah, Iraqi Kurdistan is actually quite a rich place.
And Kosovo, I realise that. It's just that sometimes there are mothers and babies and people that seem to be very frightened and very desperate.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, they're very frightened and very desperate because a criminal put them in a rubber dinghy, took thousands of pounds from them to illegally traffic them across a dangerous piece of water. Norma, thanks for the call. I'm glad you got in earlier. Monty is in Edinburgh. Go ahead, Monty.
Hi there, George.
Yes.
First, I want to say thank you so much. I've been watching your program for almost over 2 years now.
Good, thank you. Are you there, Monty?
Yes. Sorry,
go ahead.
Yeah.
Most kind of you. Thank you. What would you like to say?
I want to say I'm actually an immigrant from Cape Town, right?
Okay. I know Cape Town very well.
Yeah.
I gave my blood there on the floor of the Guguletu police station.
Oh, right. All right.
During apartheid.
Yes, I used to fight. I was one of the. I shouldn't say these things, but I used to fight for the militant group called Abdon that used to give the militant hand in the Western Cape. But the problem I have recently, and there's a lot of problems that happen over the years, is this company Big Pharma. I've got parents there I've got parents now back at home that do not want to have the vaccine now because of what Big Pharma started last year. And what they did there now is on board. So far, since last year, I lost probably about 20 family members alone. And this is besides friends. And it seems to me that this Big Pharma is just not being held accountable for what they're doing. I've got parents now there, like I said now, that do not want to take the vaccine.
Well, that's entirely their right, of course, not to take the vaccine, as it's yours or anyone else's right. I fully support that
I
right.
agree with you.
I'm vaccinated, and I encourage everyone to get vaccinated. Not because it's going to solve the problem, but because it will blunt the problem, hopefully.
Yeah, but I agree with you. The problem that I do have is that they spread so much confusion there on already people that's already struggling. And now the majority of the people on the ground there do not want to take the vaccine.
Well, how do you know that? How do you know that, Monty?
Because I speak
You speak to the majority of the people in South Africa?
Every day.
You speak to
Not the majority,
20 million people every day?
No, I don't. That's a wee bit far-fetched. What I'm trying to say, I've got about 13 cousins and things that's all in the medical profession. My original qualifications is in the medical profession too. They spread so much, or they did what they did now because of this Johnson & Johnson vaccine that they spread.
I keep losing, Monty.
Oh, sorry, and they seem to do this in the majority of the African countries, and this is what gives rise to all these.
I'll tell you what a bigger problem in the African countries is that they don't have enough vaccines, and that's because Big Pharma, that you denounced earlier, will not give up the patent and is charging some African countries double what they are charging in Western countries.
Exactly.
So I'm not sure if you're arguing for more vaccination or less.
Well, my argument is for adequate supply.
Well, we're definitely on the same page on that, Monty. Thanks very much indeed for the call. Now, as I often say, in a sane world, my next guest would be the President of the United States, or at least the Secretary of State. He is the writer and broadcaster and colleague of mine on RT America, Chris Hedges. Chris, welcome back to the show. It's always a pleasure to see you. Can I begin by asking you about the trial that begins, I think tomorrow, of a rather famous woman around these parts, formerly of this parish, by the name of Ghislaine Maxwell. What can you tell us? Is that being eagerly anticipated, or are people not really much occupied by it now?
No, I think it'll get some traction. It's a fascinating case because it has so many legal anomalies. There's strong evidence that Jeffrey Epstein may not have killed himself, may have been murdered. Certainly the Julie Brown, the investigative reporter for the Miami Herald, who's done the most extensive work on the case, believes quite firmly that he was murdered. There are supposedly caches of videotapes that Epstein had set up security cameras in his residences, including in his bathrooms, that have all sorts of figures on them, from Bill Clinton to Donald Trump to Ehud Barak. Those have all vanished. I assume the FBI has them. We don't know where they are. Ghislaine Maxwell herself, who procured these underage women for Epstein and for his friends, obviously knows a lot. A lot of people think that they're going to strike some kind of a deal to protect the circle that he's in. And many of the other procurers, she wasn't the only one, have never been charged. So yeah, I think there's interest in it from the salacious standpoint. I'm interested in it just because it seems quite clear that all sorts of powerful people who ran in his circle are not only never going to be charged, but never called out.
Quite so. And all the things you've just said, in a way, answer what was my next question, which is, why isn't this going to be televised? We see from O.J. Simpson onwards, we had a camera in every courtroom, it seemed. The Rittenhouse trial just ended just last week was endlessly televised. Why would this case, involving as it does all these big names, not be televised?
Well, I think that there's clearly powerful forces at work that intend to cover up the activities of all sorts of members of the ruling elite on both of the political divides, Republicans and Democrats, many Harvard academics, including Steven Pinker, Alan Dershowitz, Larry Summers, Bill Gates. I mean, all these people, you're talking about the ruling elite. And that's why a lot of people suppose that some kind of a deal will be made with Ghislaine Maxwell to keep her quiet. But if there's been one constant throughout this case, we go back 10 years to the initial charges against Epstein, it's that all of these people have been protected. I don't see that changing.
No, I mean, important as the sexual crimes are, and if true, the allegations are horrific and despicable, the bigger picture is, for me, even more important. It's quite clear to me, as an observer and as someone who knows the Maxwell family extremely well, that this was all an intelligence operation from the beginning. That although disgusting, dirty men were doing dirty things to underage girls, the real purpose was to get the goods on those people for exploitation, commercial and political, and intelligence. Is that how you see it?
Well, in the court documents, there is a reference to Epstein working at least as an FBI informant. So yes, I think we know that as a fact. If you look at the way intelligence services operate anywhere in the world, of course, blackmail is key. J. Edgar Hoover had files on all of the powerful. It's why they could never remove him in order to keep them in check. So I think we are wandering into a field of speculation, but I don't think it's unreasonable speculation. And of course, Epstein had very close ties to Israel. So, other than that reference within the court documents of him having a working relationship with the FBI, I don't know that we have anything hard on which to argue that this was an intelligence operation, but it certainly smells like one.
Well, it's just that when you get very powerful and significant figures, former presidents, former prime ministers, members of royal families, regularly in attendance of a man now proven to have been a sex criminal, you've got to ask yourself, what did all these people, Bill Gates and so on, what did all these people see in this Jeffrey Epstein? Did they just enjoy his company, his taste in art? It's kind of obvious that they were drawn into his web somehow. And the fact that videos and recording devices of all kinds were in use in his various palatial homes leads me, at least, simple guy me, to believe that these people were effectively being blackmailed.
Yeah, I mean, look, he stole $50 million from Wexler, who was the head of Victoria's Secret, and Wexler never wanted to charge him. So that begs the question. What did Epstein have on Wexler that made Wexler want to swallow $50 million? But again, these are all questions that have not been answered, and I suspect, given the panoply of figures involved, will probably never be answered. My supposition is that the FBI has these tapes, which means no one will ever see them.
Let's turn to cheerier matters. Your president, how is he doing? He looked pretty poorly the last time I saw him, but he's now promising that his stimulus package is going to deliver the goods. How's that going down in America?
Not well, as the opinion polls have repeatedly shown. He just announced, by the way, that will be running for re-election in 2024, and all the polls show that in a matchup with Donald Trump, he would lose. Most of this money, what was going to directly towards people in need, has been sliced out, largely by lobbyists in Washington. So the bill will funnel large sums of money either to the states or to corporations. But, trickle-down economics has long been exposed as a kind of farce. Very little will reach the people in need. And but that's not surprising. Biden has served corporate interests. They used to call him Senator Credit Card. He was out of the state of Delaware, where for tax reasons, a lot of large credit card companies are located, who, by the way, at the time employed his son, Hunter Biden, for astronomical sums. He was picked by the ruling elite to carry on the disastrous policies that have given rise to figures like Trump and the deep malaise, frustration, and anger, most of it legitimate, on the part of a working class, and especially a white working class, that has been dispossessed and been dispossessed by both parties. Both parties have been complicit in this, which is why the established Republican elite has people like Liz Cheney, for instance, the daughter of Dick Cheney, the vice president, because she's against Trump, is largely bonded now with the Democratic Party elite, as long as all these figures, traditional figures of the Republican leadership, Mitt Romney, the people who
George W. Bush,
George Bush, right? Exactly. So I think Biden almost guarantees loss for the Democrats in the House and the Senate in 2022, and I think assures the rise in 2024 of either Trump or a Trump-like figure, Pompeo, DeSantis, the governor of Florida. I don't know who. We don't know who it will be, but it will be somebody in that vein.
All of which begs a question. I've asked you it before. Forgive me asking it again. You can't blame the elite for seeking to get a president that will be pliable to them into the White House, but how come Joe Biden was the best that they could find? What is it about the American political system? It could equally apply here to Boris Johnson, I readily concede. How come Joe Biden's the best that corporate America could put up to be president?
Because the system's ossified. It doesn't work. The Democratic and Republican parties don't function as real political parties. There is no base. It's all spectacle. It's driven by insane amounts of money, $1 billion it takes in order to run a presidential campaign. You can't run for the House of Representatives unless you raise millions of dollars. Well, where does that money come from, and who are you beholden to? So the entire system is seized up. And I think Biden is kind of emblematic of how ossified, anemic, and largely, at least in terms of populist support, irrelevant it is. You look at the decay of any system, late Weimar Germany. Who did they cough up? Franz von Papen. And that didn't last too long. So I think we're watching a similar process whereby the political system is so decayed, it's manifested in a decayed figure like Biden.
Chris Hedges, always a pleasure, a real pleasure to hear you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We're running out of time fast, so let me race on. Pink Floyd's album, The Wall, was released this week in 1979. Who was the band's original singer? A. Roger Waters, B. Engelbert Humperdinck, C. Sid Barrett? Answer after that.
Radio Sputnik.
Gosh darn, how do you get this thing to work? Is it that one? Is it this one here? Gosh, was this thing built in America? Jeez. Kamala, would you get in here? I can't get the, gosh darn wireless to work.
You know I can't answer questions, Joe, when I'm laughing.
I'm trying to, listen to that Scottish guy on the wireless, the Galloway fella.
Oh, Joe, you're so funny.
I've been pressing this red button on and off and on and off. Heck, I can't get it to work. Hello, Biden residence.
Mr. President, be advised, we have executed the airstrike on Syria. Confirmed.
That's just great. How long until it gets delivered? I'm starving.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Now, I bet most of you thought the answer was Engelbert Humperdinck, or even Roger Waters. But in fact, it was Sid Barrett. He was the original singer in Pink Floyd. Now, our next guest, final guest, is Shadia Edwards-Dashti, my RT colleague here in London, and I'm glad to say she joins us now. Shadia, thanks for joining us. A slight rush now because of the pressure of calls and so on. So can I go quickly into asking you a question that may not be the most important question that you or I have contemplated this week, but it's an interesting one. We've got a poll running. Should MPs be allowed to bring their babies into the parliamentary chamber? This, as you know, arises from a Labour MP by the name of Stella Creasy, very far from a friend of mine, but who is a new mother with a young baby and sought to, on a sling, bring the baby into the chamber and was blocked by the House authorities for having done so. What's your take on that? Is this an issue that is worth campaigning about? Is it worth arguing about? I personally think it is, but go ahead, give me your view.
George, friend or foe, Labour or Tory, comrade or not, a woman is a woman, a mother is a mother, and absolutely we should be advocating and standing in solidarity with a mother who is simply trying to do her job, both jobs, a mother and a politician, all in one, simultaneously, trying to do the best she can. And we should totally be making it a safe space, a good space, and a welcome space for her to be able to exercise both jobs and do them to the best of her ability. So yes, I absolutely would say she should, as any mother should, have a right to be in the House of Commons, a space that's supposed to be a safe one to represent the entire nation. We should be in a safe space to allow her to do so.
Well, I'm glad that we've got agreement on that. All kinds of things are brought into the House of Commons, some of them illegal substances, one hears. The idea that a tiny baby actually strapped on to its mother is somehow uniquely offensive is quite extraordinary. The Parliament is supposed to be, it's called the House of Commons. It's supposed to be a chamber, it isn't really, but it's supposed to be a chamber in which the country, the nation, all the people of the nation, men and women, black and white, gay and straight, with children, without children, are there in the crucible, if you like. It just seems to me a ridiculous decision by the House authorities on that. However, there's bigger, if you like, bigger issues coming up this week. It's just been announced that the SNP have tabled a motion of no confidence in Boris Johnson that will have to be heard in this coming week at Westminster. Now, ordinarily, you wouldn't put too much store by that, because if the SNP are the only people to vote for it, it's going nowhere. But given that there's now a dozen Tory MPs have themselves tabled a motion inside the Conservative Party expressing no confidence in Boris Johnson, it just might get a little bit tasty. What do you think?
Well, it's a very telling time when your own pals are turning their backs on you, isn't it, George? Of course, if Boris Johnson is now seeing those people that are supposed to be backing him now saying, actually, we need to be pointing the finger of blame directly at you, that is quite a worrying space for Boris Johnson to be in. We know that tabling a motion of no confidence is no trivial matter. It's actually incredibly serious, particularly when it's people within the Tory party are doing it. We haven't often seen that, but what that goes to show really is that I'm not saying anything good about the Labour Party. I don't think this has anything to do with the successes of the Labour Party, but really goes to show just how many failures Boris Johnson is guilty of at the moment. It's not just about the pandemic anymore. Of course, that alone was enough to have a go at Boris Johnson, but at the moment, the current political climate, we're seeing sleaze after sleaze allegations. Then, of course, these tragic deaths in the English Channel. That's two big things in just a week. And so it's no wonder now that people are saying Boris Johnson is just not up to scratch. He's not leading the country. He never has led the country in anything. He's now leading the country into complete failure, and political failure at that.
Well, that's interesting that you say so. I feel the same looking at him. I've never, of course, regarded him highly, but I always thought he had a certain je ne sais quoi that won him elections and allowed him to busk through very difficult circumstances. But he strikes me as someone who has begun to lose his grip. It's one damn thing after another, as you say. And now that we appear to be heading back into more trouble on the COVID front, you just wonder if a critical mass is not developing inside the Conservative Party, perhaps being encouraged by his next-door neighbour, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak. Wouldn't be the first Chancellor to be intriguing against their boss, Gordon Brown being just the most recent and famous. What's your feeling? Is he here for the foreseeable, or might he be moving into difficult circumstances?
Totally moving into difficult circumstances at this point, particularly as you raise the COVID pandemic. If we look at his tenure, it's pretty much been predicated by the virus and the political climate that's come with. So what we're really looking at is a Prime Minister that hasn't really had to deal with an awful lot, but even what he's had to deal with is pretty tragic in terms of a political timeline. So looking at the pandemic then, what we've seen is total mixed messages going to the public. We've heard eat out to help out, then stay at home, stay in your bubble, go to work, but don't get on the public transport, use a car, but of course we're going to whip you with a congestion charge. So the public are just like, what should I do? And now as we go back into a possible lockdown in the imminent future, maybe or maybe not, either way, the public are just looking at the current government thinking, I don't trust you. I don't believe you. You're telling me now to put masks back on, but are you wearing masks? We look at Boris Johnson in COP26. He wasn't wearing one, nor was he wearing one in hospitals at the height of the pandemic. We saw him at the beginning of the pandemic, shaking people's hands that had COVID. So when it comes to looking at the political paradigm at the moment, through the lens of a pandemic, you just think, Boris Johnson, you've got no clue Why should I believe you? Why should I trust you? And if you look at this specific point, which affects every single person, whether or not you're on the left or right or not even bothered about politics at all, everybody is affected by the pandemic, and every political rule affects the public. And now they're interested in politics and they're thinking, hang on a minute, something's not quite right here. I don't trust you. And that is why I think Boris Johnson's time is up.
Very interesting. We've got big by-elections coming up. Do you think the Tories have anything to fear in any of those?
Well, the Tories are in some ways something to fear, because that's all that the politics is known to be at the moment. Unfortunately, we have a very weak opposition, and so it feels as though politics is becoming even more polarized. Either you're at this absolute extreme or you're part of the Tory party. Unfortunately, Keir Starmer's doing nothing to really challenge the status quo at the moment. So it's a really difficult time to be engaged in politics, in my opinion. I personally feel politically homeless because my home is not in the Labour Party at the moment. So in that sense, you may feel, okay, the Tories might have a good chance in these by-elections, but then I'm an activist, so I'm always going to be on the side of momentum, people working together to fight that status quo, to fight against the establishment. And I'm never going to sit here and say that I think it's going to be a walk in the park for the Tory party.
Shadia, as always, fantastic. Thanks very much for touring the British horizon with us this evening. I've got about 30 calls waiting to be put through. Let me tell you again about that poll. Should MPs be allowed to bring their babies into the parliamentary chamber? Yes, 19%. No, 81%. Shadia and I very much in a minority there. Now, who's this caller? The People's Republic of South Yorkshire is on the line. Tell.
My name's Tell.
You're welcome, mate. The People's Republic of South Yorkshire used to be David Blunkett. Look what happened to him.
Oh, well, it's funny you mention him, George, because I was campaigning for him back in 1987 in Brightside. Stood on the stage with him of the Sheffield Trades.
I remember when he declared, he twinned the city of Sheffield with Nicaragua. He declared that Sheffield was now a nuclear-free zone, whatever that meant. But now, no,
it's funny. It's funny you mention Floyd as well, because I used to, back in 1987, I used to be managed by Pete Jenner, who was Floyd's original manager.
Oh, really? So you were in the music business?
I was in a band called The Way a long time ago, and we did after the Redskins split, we did a lot of benefits for the.
All of that went right over my head there, Tell. We better move on. What would you like to say?
You never listened to the Redskins, I'm
No,
surprised.
I've never heard the Redskins. I've never heard of The Way.
Mate. You'd love them. You would love them.
Would I?
Yes,
the Redskins, a very politically incorrect name nowadays, Tell.
It is now, but back then they were the premier band during the miners' strike. Put it that way.
Really?
Yeah.
I'll check them out. I'll check them out. Sorry, I keep making you digress. Make your point, brother.
Because I'm slightly disappointed in some of your language tonight.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, I am. I believe that there's there's been a growing right-wing movement, and anything that we can do to stop the rise of the right, who have taken this crossing of the channel as a cause célèbre, anything we can do to dampen that, to me, is...
what do you want me to do? Pretend it's not happening?
And we have to show compassion.
Do you want me to pretend it's not happening?
Well, it has to happen, George. And I speak for a lot of people that I know you're friends with who would agree with me on this. It's a very delicate time, and when children, babies are dying in the channel, right? Okay, we know that France and the EU, they're to blame for a lot of the crisis, but we caused the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we're supplying bombs to Yemen. We're arming.
Yeah, of course, I know all that.
We spend the money on the wrong things.
No,
and my point is this,
I know all that, but are you in favour of open borders?
I tell you, mate, you've hit the right guy tonight, because I'm not in favour of flags. I'm not in favour of borders. I'm in favour of Spaceship Earth, mate. And you might see that as a really silly and ignorant thing to say.
That's of course a point of view. It's generally held by. It's generally held. It's generally held by liberals and Trotskyites and the most naked free market capitalists, because they're the people who want no borders. They're the people who want all of Afghanistan to be allowed to come in and live in Britain. They're the people who think that anybody in the world should be able to go to any other country and live there. But I represent the workers still. I stand for the working class in Britain, and the working class in Britain would be utterly devastated by any such policy. Can't you see?
That's right. Could I just make one last point before you, because I've obviously got a lot of calls. My point's always this. Take a trip up in a plane over the UK and see how the land's divided and which it's built on, and how unfair and unequal it is. We've got lords, earls, viscounts, dukes, barons.
These are all just tropes. These are all tropes. You tell the workers in South Yorkshire that because
they have to rise and they have to take back the lands that were taken from them in this country and the wealth
and give them to the people of Afghanistan to come and live here.
We have to. The people of the world are all human beings. We all bleed red.
We are, but we live in a world that is based upon nation states. And
people who died in the Channel were Iraqis.
No, they were Iraqi Kurds. That's right.
That's right.
They were Iraqi Kurds. There's been no war.
They probably made an excellent contribution to this country.
But this country can only accept a controlled number, a limited number of legal immigrants.
Of United Arab Emirates. Russians.
Listen, Iraqi Kurds don't speak Arabic, mate. There has been no war in Iraqi Kurdistan since 1990. Do you understand that?
People apply for asylum in Germany, in Sweden, in France. You know that's true, man.
Do you concede my point? These Iraqi Kurds are not fleeing from war. They're not fleeing from us. We were their allies.
4-year-old children.
We were their allies, We actually control Iraqi Kurdistan.
Been beaten, my friend. I'd put the phone down. Anyway, have a good week, my friend. All the best to you.
Wow. Did he run away? Cornelius in Swansea. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Cornelius.
Evening, George. How are you, mate?
All right. I get annoyed at these this parade of liberal tropes, and then they run away from the argument. Go ahead.
I think your last caller must have been smoking too much weed or something, pal. Because
no, I'm sure not. I'm sure not. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, the reason why I quickly called, because I was listening to you having a conversation just now with that young lady that's part of your team, like, and she's blowing
Shadia, yes, she's wonderful, yeah.
Yeah, but she's not so wonderful. Talking about a Labour MP who thinks it's right to take a newborn baby into Parliament while there's heated debate and
I wish, Cornelius. I wish there was heated debate.
Nonsense.
I wish there was heated debate.
Well, it is debate.
Look, I wouldn't take my baby into the Chamber of the House of Commons because I don't like the company. But if she wants to take her, it's not newborn, by the way, it's a few months old, take her baby of a few months into the House of Commons chamber, why not? There's people with cocaine in their pockets in the House of Commons chambers.
Yeah, but the people who are sitting in the chamber with cocaine in their pockets will not interrupt any conversation that's going on, will they?
Well, what's your problem with that? If the baby wakes up, is that your point?
No, George. If the child wakes up and all of a sudden it's crying, and if you've got one person with a child, and then you've got 10 people with a children in there, and everybody's screaming and dancing, get real, for God's sake. Why should this MP be the only woman on the planet to get her way by taking a child into the workplace. There's plenty of crashes about. She's in exactly the same position as any woman in the world that is working and has a family to support. End of.
Okay, Cornelius, I wish I had time to argue with you, but I don't. Good call, though. Susan in Glasgow, let's hear from her. Go ahead, Susan.
Hello, George.
Hi.
Merry Christmas to you.
And to you.
And everybody listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to talk about Donbass.
Oh, yes.
The conflict in eastern Ukraine, which people may not know, has now killed about 14,000 people.
Wow, even I didn't know
that. Civilians and combatants. And I must confess that I am partisan here. I'm very much on the side of the so-called separatists in the east of Ukraine who took up arms, who I think were really forced to take up arms because of an illegal coup that took place in Ukraine about 7 years ago, where the elected leader Yanukovych was run out of power, and a leader, I can't even remember his name, it might have been Poroshenko, but it was some dummy, storefront dummy that was put in charge.
Yeah, this was an American regime change operation.
By the EU and America.
Yeah.
And the people rebelled because their government had been overthrown. And they also rebelled because the people who seized power were backed by neo-Nazis. And they're backed by people who have a love affair with the Nazi collaborator in the Second World War,
Exactly so.
Banderas.
Exactly so. And indeed, the Russian language was immediately declared to be no longer an official language of the state.
That's right. So, I mean, there are at least three reasons, cultural, political, social, why the people in eastern Ukraine want to take their distance of this coup regime that's ongoing in Kiev.
Well, you're absolutely right, Susan. Because of the hour, I'll have to cut it short. Well, make one last point.
No, right. One last point is that I've been following on Twitter a very important freelance photographer who has been documenting the ongoing conflict from Donbass in eastern Ukraine for a number of years now. And I would love it if you would consider inviting him on your show to speak about Donbass.
Okay.
His name is Dean O'Brien.
Dean O'Brien, if you could make a note of that in the gallery. I need to press on, Susan. Thanks for the tip. I promise you that we'll do that. Lewis in my own hometown of Dundee, he's up next. Go ahead, Lewis.
Proud to be back. This one's a bit of a long one, but it's relating to what I asked you last week. So I'll let you know when it's finished so you can answer.
Very good of you. Thank you. Go ahead.
When I asked you about your distaste of Trotskyites, I'd like to ask about when you mentioned ultra-leftism, wrecking socialist movements. What did you mean by those terms? And when you also said scratching a Trotskyite, you'll usually find a liberal. What is the similarities between the two?
Lots, lots. I can't let you go on, Lewis, because the hour is very late. I have spoken, and I did last week, you now remind me, and written about this many times. The reality is that the kind of ultra-leftism that you've heard on here this evening, of no borders, every human being should be allowed to come here. Anybody that's in need should be allowed to come in Britain, is so otherworldly as to guarantee the oblivion of the socialist idea and the socialist movement. I'm the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain. In fact, I've got a big meeting coming up in Birmingham, if people are interested in that. I've got a call. I've got a call about it. But as the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain, I have to guard the interests of the working people in Britain, because it does what it says on the tin. Now, I mean white workers and black workers and brown workers and workers of all orientations from all kinds of places. I mean everybody who is in Britain and who has to work for a living. I've got to try and win them to the project that I believe in. And if you were to walk in to any workplace, any working man's club, any trade union gathering on the shop floor, anywhere, and tell them that your policy was to knock down the borders and allow everybody to come here, they'd think you were utterly mad. And you would be. Lauren in Birmingham, about the very meeting I just started telling you about. Go ahead, Lauren.
Yes. Hi, George. Great show as always.
Thank you.
Just wanted to, say we're really looking forward to seeing you on Friday. We've been out in Birmingham today in the snow, speaking to working people of the city, inviting them and encouraging them to come along on Friday. And people are really excited to see you, to see Chris Williamson, to hear some great local music artists, and to hear about the vision that we have for the city. So I just want to, give it a bit of a plug, but thank you, and just say, we're really excited to see you on Friday.
Thanks. Just tell us again quickly where, when, what time?
Yeah, so this Friday, 3rd of December at 7 p.m. It'll be at our office on Moseley Road in Highgate, which is number 274. It's just near the old fire station for anyone who's local. I'm sure they'll know. But it's also, you can find the information on our Twitter page, Brum Worker, or on our blog, birminghamworker.org.
Fantastic, Lauren. Thanks for making that call. Saved me making the announcement myself. Last call of the evening is Kenny in Acton. Go ahead, Kenny.
Good evening, George.
Good evening, sir.
I'm just in my last delivery. I think you're aware I work as a motorcycle courier.
Oh, that's right. Yes. I recall.
Busy.
Yes.
Yesterday I made 200 quid because of the weather. So there weren't enough couriers on. So the Uber Eats put the promotions up. And tonight will take me up to 190 quid in about 10 hours. So in the space of 2 days, I've made nearly 400 quid. That's incredible, is it not?
So that's what, £19 an hour, £20 an hour. Yeah, it's obviously better than a poke in the eye with a dry stick. It's better than the average wage. But you're having to run about on a motorbike in this weather. It's hardly extravagant.
I know, but I got warm enough clothes and under thermals. Anyway, I've got a rock and roll trivia question for you.
All right, quickly though.
Which rock and roll film featured this song? She's got sugar dip kisses and cherry dip charms. I melt like butter in my honey-filled arms. She's a cake-picking baby, and I love her pies. She's a cinnamon sinner, selling lollipop lies. Was it A, Jailhouse Rock, B, The Girl Can't Help It, or C, Rock, Rock, Rock?
I honestly don't know. I don't think I've ever heard that song before. So quickly tell me.
It's B, The Girl Can't Help It, which features Little Richard, Eddie Cochran, and a few others as well.
Jane Mansfield, there's a name from the past. It's been marvellous. Hope you enjoyed it.